Fulchester Crown Court, the defendant, Dr. Paul Napier, faces a charge of living wholly or in part on the earnings of a prostitute. The prosecution has called its first witness, Detective Sergeant Ralph McCovey.
I swear by Almighty God that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Detective Sergeant Ralph McCovey, Fulchester CID, my lord.
Detective Sergeant McCovey, how long have you been with the Fulchester Police Force?
11 years.
So you've been in the police force since you were 18?
That's correct.
Now, Sergeant, are you the officer who's been in charge of the investigations leading up to this case?
I am.
Now, will you tell us when you first became involved in these investigations?
May I consult my notebook, my lord?
Well, now, Miss Tate...
my lord, if I may assist, I have seen a copy of the notes. I've no objection.
Thank you, Miss Tate. Yes, Sergeant.
Thank you, my lord. As a result of information received, I kept watch on certain premises in Motcombe Road, Fulchester, the basement flat at number 36.
When did you keep watch, Sergeant?
On May the 16th, 17th and 18th, between 2 p.m. and 10 p.m. each day.
And what, if anything, did you observe?
On the 16th, I saw 4 men go to the door of the basement.
One moment, please. 4 men? Together or by themselves?
By themselves. Each one went to the flat, rang the bell, the door opened, they went inside, stayed about half an hour.
Yes, and on the 17th?
There were 3 such visitors.
And on the 18th?
7, sir.
And on each occasion, the pattern more or less repeated itself, a visit of about half an hour?
Well, there were some who stayed longer. The longest was about an hour and a half.
And did you keep any further watch?
No, sir.
Now, did you observe something else at about the same time?
Yes, it was about this time that my attention was drawn to an advertisement in a newsagent's window.
You went to the shop yourself to inspect it?
Yes.
Will you describe the advertisement?
Yes, it was on a card, about the same size as a postcard, placed horizontally. On the left side was a photo of a young woman, head and shoulders facing front. On the right side was the text of the advertisement, which read, "What your stars foretell. Have your chart drawn up. Miss Virgo will reveal all."
Miss who will reveal all?
Miss Virgo, my lord, one of the signs of the zodiac.
Yes, I'm well aware of that. As a matter of fact, it happens to be my... Yes, well, who was it who drew your attention to this advertisement?
One of the constables on the beat in that area, my lord.
I see. Yes.
Was there anything else on the card?
Anything else? Oh, yes, the phone number. The words "ring for appointment," followed by the telephone number.
May the sergeant be shown Exhibit 1, please? Is that the advertisement?
Yes.
Yes, Sergeant, I'm not quite clear what connection there is between this advertisement and the house that you had under surveillance.
Well, there was no direct connection, my lord, until I rang the number.
I see. When did you do that?
The 20th, May the 20th, my lord.
To whom did you speak, Sergeant, when you telephoned that number?
A woman. I asked to speak to Miss Virgo. She said she was Miss Virgo. I said I was ringing about the advert in the newsagent's window. She asked if I wanted to make an appointment. I said yes, I did. She said she could give me one the following day at 3 o'clock. I said that would be all right. I then asked what the fee would be, and she said that would depend.
You asked her how much it was going to cost, and Miss Virgo then said that would depend.
Yes, she said the initial consultation was £5.
Now, what did you infer by that?
Well, I inferred that there might be extras.
Extras, yes. Did Miss Virgo then give you her address?
Yes, she said it was the basement flat at number 36 Motcombe Road, the entrance being at the side of the house.
And this was the house upon which you had been keeping watch?
That's correct, my lord.
You kept the appointment?
Yes.
Will you describe what took place?
Well, she took my coat and I sat
one moment, please. Miss Virgo took your coat?
Yes. Well, the flat was warm. In fact, it was overheated. I sat on a sofa and Miss Virgo sat at a desk. She asked me questions concerning my birthday, the date, the time. Oh, yes, first she asked if I'd ever had an astrology reading before. I said no. She asked if I was genuinely interested in astrology or if I'd just come out of curiosity. I said I was genuinely interested. She then interpreted my stars, what planets were in the ascendancy, what was in store for me in the near future in the way of good luck, bad news, etc. After which, she asked if I wanted her to compile my zodiac chart. I asked what that entailed. She said it would take a few days to do. I'd have to come back for it the following week. it would cost £10. I said...
Now, was that £10 over and above the £5 for the initial reading?
Yes. I said I would think about that. She said I could give her a ring if I decided to have it done. She then asked for the £5.
And you gave it to her?
Not right away. I then said, is that all? And she said, how do you mean? I said, well, do I go now? And she said, what did you expect? I said, I'm not sure, really. She then got up from behind the desk and came over and sat on the sofa. And she said...
She got up and came over and sat next to you on the sofa?
Yes. She said, do you want...
Close to you?
Quite close. She said, do you want to stay a bit longer? I said, I wouldn't mind. She said, you haven't come here for sex, have you? I said, I wouldn't say no. She said, why? I said, well, you've got a smashing figure for a start.
You said you've got a smashing figure for a start?
Yes, I said that, yes.
Why, Sergeant? How much of her figure had you seen?
Well, she was wearing a tight-fitting sweater and a short skirt.
Was she? Please go on, Sergeant.
She said, I'm not a whore, you know. I said, I'm sure you're not. She said, if you want to stay longer, I'll have to ask you to pay for the chart being drawn up, which is £10, and to sign this form.
So Miss Virgo then said, if you want to stay longer, I'll have to ask you to pay for the chart being drawn up, which is £10, and to sign this form.
Yes.
Then what?
She got up and went back to the desk to get a printed form, which she gave to me. At this moment, the baby started to cry.
The baby started to cry?
Yes, my lord.
Well, where? Where was the baby?
In the next room, my lord. Miss Virgo said, oh, excuse me, I'll be back in a minute, and then she went into the next room.
And what did you do, Sergeant?
Oh, I read the form she'd given me. It said that the fee of £15 was for consultation, astroanalysis, and zodiac chart, with a space below for the date and signature.
Did you sign it?
No, I dropped it on the desk together with a £5 note and left the flat.
Will you describe the room in which you were entertained?
Well, it was sort of cosy and feminine with subdued lighting.
Subdued lighting. This was 3 o'clock in the afternoon, wasn't it?
Yes, but the curtains were closed.
The curtains were closed at 3 in the afternoon, and the room was in subdued lighting.
Yes, and then there was a bed in the corner.
Ah, then there was the bed. Where was the bed?
In a corner of the room, with a red satin bedspread on it.
A red satin bedspread. Red satin. What did you do next, Sergeant?
My next move was on the following day, May the 21st. I called at number 36 Motcombe Road to see Dr. Paul Napier, whom I had ascertained was the owner of the house. He lived on the ground floor.
Perhaps you'd better describe the general layout of the house.
Yes, it was divided into 4 flats, one on each floor. Dr. Napier himself lived on the ground floor, and there were 2 upstairs, and there was a flat in the basement.
Were the 2 flats upstairs also occupied?
Yes.
And did you then call on Dr. Napier?
Yes, it was 10 a.m. The accused answered the door. I identified myself, and I said right out that I had reason to believe that the basement flat was being used for the purposes of prostitution.
What was his reaction?
He denied it. He said he knew the young lady personally, and he was quite sure...
Excuse me, he said he knew the young lady personally?
Yes, and he was quite sure she was not a prostitute. I said, are you aware that the flat is being used for business purposes? He said, yes. I understand that it is being used for astrology readings. I said, I have reason to believe it is being used for more than that. I then asked what rent was being paid for the basement flat, and he said £50.
£50? A month?
No, my lord. I said a month, and he said no, a week, my lord.
Oh, furnished or unfurnished?
Furnished, my lord.
Well, how large was the flat?
2 rooms, kitchen and bath, my lord.
Well, do you know what was the rent of the other flats in the same building?
Yes, my lord. I said, who is the tenant of the top floor? He said, Mr. Roberts. I said, what is his rent?
Yes.
And he said, £8 per week. I said, who is the tenant of the first floor? And he said, Mr. and Mrs. Hurst. I asked what the rent was, and he said £9 per week, my lord.
Were the flats upstairs about the same size as the one in the basement?
Just about, yes.
And were they also furnished?
Yes.
So let's get this quite clear, Sergeant. The rent that the accused admitted he was charging for the basement flat was virtually 3 times the amount he was charging for the other 2 flats put together.
That's correct. I pointed this out to Dr. Napier, and he said he was quite capable of doing that sum himself. I asked him if he was aware that it was an offence to live wholly or in part on the immoral earnings of a prostitute, and he said he was well aware of it, but he was doing no such thing. I then terminated the interview.
How many interviews did you have with the accused?
4, including the last one when I cautioned and arrested him. I saw him on the May the 21st and the 9th, 17th and 25th of June. On both the 9th and the 17th of June, I made it clear to him that the police would be satisfied and no further action taken if he would only evict Miss Virgo from the basement flat.
Was he in a position to do so?
Oh yes, it being a furnished tenancy on a weekly basis and not being protected by the Rent Acts.
But he was not interested in doing so. He was quite satisfied with the situation the way it was.
Oh, he was more than satisfied. Oh, he was laughing. Well, he'd got a little gold mine down there in the basement.
Detective Sergeant McCovey, throughout your evidence you have referred to the tenant of the basement flat as Miss Virgo. But that is not her name, as you are well aware.
Well, that's her professional name, and this case is to do with her professional activities.
Well, what is the name of the tenant of the basement flat at 36 Motcombe Road?
Mary Heppel.
Miss or Mrs.?
Mrs.
Thank you. Mrs. Mary Heppel, and that is the name to which I will refer to her by. And that is the name under which she will appear as a witness for the defense. Now, Sergeant McCovey, you have described that during a 6-week period in May and June of this year, you had 4 interviews with the defendant, Dr. Paul Napier.
That's correct.
You also described 1 meeting you had with Mrs. Heppel, and that was the occasion when, posing as a client, you went to her basement flat for an astrology reading. Now, we'll come back to that meeting in a moment, but first I want to ask you if you had any other meetings with Mrs. Heppel.
Yes.
How many?
2.
And when did they take place?
In June.
Before or after the defendant was charged with this offence?
Once before and once after.
Well, you didn't mention those meetings with Mrs. Heppel in your evidence in chief.
I wasn't asked about them.
Quite so. My learned friend chose not to ask you. Perhaps you'd tell us something about them?
Well, I went to see Miss Virgo, Mrs. Heppel, accompanied by a woman police officer. And I told her that we had reason to believe she was using the basement flat for the purposes of prostitution. As a result of which, there were charges pending against the landlord, Dr. Napier.
And did she recognize you from the time you'd come to have your stars read?
Yes.
What was her reaction?
Not much. It didn't seem to bother her.
She wasn't angry at the trick that you played on her?
No, she was amused, or pretended to be.
What else did you speak to her about?
Oh, I told her that I believed the whole astrology thing to be just a front, a cover-up for being on a bash.
On the bash, my lord,
Yes,
meaning...
yes, Miss Tate, I know all about being on the bash. That is to say, Mr. Lotterby, I understand what the phrase means. Now, Sergeant, how did Mrs. Heppel react to your accusation?
Well, she denied it, my lord. She said I was being very insulting. She said she wouldn't dream of taking a penny for sex.
She said she wouldn't take a penny for sex.
Yeah. Well, I told her to come off it, and that the best thing she could do was to stop putting on a show and cooperate.
Well, what did you mean by cooperate?
I meant, well, I told her that it would be to her advantage to just admit to what she'd been doing, and that if she did, she wasn't letting herself in for anything.
How so, letting herself in for anything?
Well, that there's no question of her facing any charge, that's all.
Yes, I see that, but how was she to cooperate?
Well, to stop all the pretense and tell the truth.
To tell the truth where and when?
I don't get you.
Well, don't you? Wasn't the purpose of your last 2 visits to her to make her become a witness for the prosecution?
I did suggest that to her, yeah.
You did more than suggest it, Sergeant. You tried to coerce her into doing so.
There was no coercion.
No pressure?
How do you mean, pressure?
Well, did you not say to Mrs. Heppel that once she was tabbed as a working prostitute, life could be made very difficult for her?
No, I didn't say...
And did you not tell her that she would be in a very vulnerable position with the police breathing down her neck from then on?
No, I didn't say that.
And did you not warn her about the child welfare authorities who may consider her an unfit parent and as a result take her daughter away from her and put her in a home?
Oh, really, my lord, the witness must be allowed to answer the question.
Yes, yes, yes. Yes, Sergeant.
I did not bring improper pressure to bear to get the girl to testify against Napier. I did no such thing. It's not why I said those things to her.
Oh, but you do admit saying those things to her.
Well, not quite the way you put it, but something along those lines, yeah. I was just trying to warn her, to give her an idea of what she was letting herself in for, doing what she was doing.
Doing what?
Working as a prostitute.
Well, there's no law against it, is there?
Well?
I say there's no law against working as a prostitute.
Well, it's against the law to solicit in the street.
We're not talking about that. I'm asking you, is it illegal or criminal to be a prostitute?
Well, as the law stands, not strictly,
You
no.
keep hedging, Sergeant McCovey. Now, you've been in the police force for 11 years. Will you please give me a yes or no answer? Is it against the law to be a prostitute?
No.
Thank you. Then what were you doing, giving Mrs. Heppel all these dire warnings? If she wasn't breaking the law, was it just for humanitarian reasons, out of the goodness of your heart?
Something like that, yes.
Trying to warn a young woman about the dangers and pitfalls of prostitution. Well, why? Why should you bother?
She was just a kid and I rather liked her.
Oh, you liked her, did you?
And there was a child, a baby involved.
I see. So you visited her twice?
Accompanied by a woman police officer, yes.
Oh, yes, yes, so you said. You visited her twice just to give her these warnings out of a friendly feeling and nothing whatsoever to do with intimidating her or telling her that it would be to her advantage to testify at this trial against the defendant?
Nothing whatever to do with that.
I see. Well, let me say here and now that we do not concede for one moment that Mrs. Heppel was or is a working prostitute. Well, let's go back to that first meeting you had with Mrs. Heppel, when you went